Greetings, students of the King's University. My name is Ryan Litton, and I'm the professor for this course in Historical Theology. I am really excited for this course. This is one of my favorite topics. This is the focus of my graduate work at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary for my master's degree in Christian thought, where I studied with Donald Fairbairn, one of the authors of one of our textbooks. Anyway, to introduce myself, I'm talking to you from my office here in Christiansburg, Virginia at Ignite Life Pacific College, which is a college here that is an extension campus of Life Pacific College in California, where, among other things, I get to teach 6 classes a year and do all of the academic admin, including overseeing the TAs and overseeing the professors and doing the class schedule, stuff like that. I attended the school in California and received my bachelor's degree in biblical studies. That's also where I met my wife, Samantha, and we got married in 2008. You can see the picture here with me, my wife, and our 2 kids. My son, John Marshall, was born in 2014, and my daughter, Amelia Isley, was born in 2016. John Marshall is named for my dad, John Roger, and my granddad, Marshall Allen, even though John Marshall happens to also be the name of the first Supreme Court Chief Justice. That's just kind of a happy accident. Amelia Isley was named by my wife, Amelia, for Amelia Pond in Doctor Who, and Isley for Mos Eisley in Star Wars. So we are both very nerdy in a lot of different ways. Anyway, like I said, I got an MA in Christian Thought from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. I graduated in 2016, just a few months before Amelia was born. And then I plan on starting a PhD program sometime in the next year or two, focusing on the New Testament's use of the Old Testament, using the patristic period kind of as an interpretive lens. So anyway, enough about me. Let's get to the course. And before we really get into the course outline or anything, we probably should talk briefly about why even do this. Hopefully you have some answer for that because you're already in the course, but it's worth talking about briefly. You may have heard the phrase, "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it." I've also heard it said that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and those who do learn from history are doomed to watch everyone else repeat it. There's a lot of truth in this. Yeah, there's just a lot that we can learn from what's happened previously and what other people have thought about. So when you're thinking about how you might articulate the doctrine of the Trinity, it's probably a good idea to look at how people previously have articulated the doctrine of the Trinity. In particular, you might want to look at Tertullian, Augustine, and Tertullian and Augustine are just really heavy hitters when it comes to the Trinity. Augustine wrote on the Trinity, which is probably the most lengthy treatise on the Trinity that's ever been written. And Tertullian is the one who came up with the word Trinity. Obviously not in English, he used the Latin word Trinitas, but that word had never been used before. He made it up to describe the Trinity. So it's very very unique. So if we want to understand the Trinity, we might want to look at these guys. And recently, there's been a debate about the doctrine of the Trinity. It's been kind of an exciting time to be a patristic scholar because a lot of people have been reading and interpreting patristics, so it's been kind of fun. But recently, with regard to gender roles, some well-known theologians have suggested that the Trinity can be used as a model for gender roles, since Jesus, after all, is ontologically equal to the Father, but he also submits to him. And so they argue that, male and female are ontologically equal, but women should submit to men, at least in the context of marriage. But also most of these theologians are saying that also should happen within the confines of the church. A lot of other theologians have suggested, and rightly, I believe, that this is a problematic approach not only to the Trinity, but also to gender roles. That conversation consisted primarily of going back to patristic sources to look at and see what they had to say about the Trinity. And so it's useful to be able to go back and look at them when we're in these debates. Additionally, it's noteworthy that both Augustine and Tertullian lived in North Africa. This is kind of a big difference from theology in general that tends to be very Western. A lot of theological reflection over the years has been dominated, at least in the Western Church, by European theologians. And so it's interesting and helpful to reflect on the fact that when we're talking about the Trinity, two of the main voices that we need to listen to are ancient and African. Now, it's debated whether or not Augustine and Tertullian were both actually ethnically from Africa. Nevertheless, they're not the European perspective that we're used to. So it's useful to have that perspective to challenge us. I've tried really hard to get across the entire globe because it does, and that's something that we need to. As I've said previously, my graduate research focused mostly on the patristic era with Dr. Fairbairn. As a result, we're going to be spending more time on the patristic era than we spend on anything else. And that's not just because, I like it, although it's definitely that. It's also because the patristic era is more influential than probably any other period in history. And you'll notice, by the way, that I sometimes say patristic era, sometimes I say patristic period. I'm going to go back and forth on that, and there's not really any importance. You can say either one or say both. It's not important. And also, Augustine is sometimes pronounced Augustine. There's a lot of debate about that, but ultimately it's not a huge. But the patristic period, when we look later in history at humanism and humanism giving way to the Reformation, we see this cry of ad fontes. Ad fontes is the slogan of humanism and also, therefore, the Reformation. And it's Latin for to the sources. And basically what that meant in humanism was looking at Greco-Roman classics, looking at Plato and Socrates, Aristotle. So it's sort of like this rediscovery of all this classic literature, which are the sources. But from the Reformation perspective, it was patristics. It was going back to the patristic period and looking at the fathers. And so you have both on the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, both sides are going back to patristics and trying to substantiate their theology from the patristics to demonstrate that they're right, because this is what was believed at the beginning, so this is what must be believed today. Patristic era has a great deal of influence. Whether you're a Calvinist or an Arminian, or as I've heard some people say, Calminian, because you take a little of both, or you just don't even like the debate at all. That's probably where my wife lands. That debate over God's sovereignty and human free will really starts to get fought by Augustine versus a guy named Pelagius. And, we'll get into the specifics of that later, but Calvin cites Augustine more frequently than any other patristic author. Augustine is his favorite, and obviously influences his theology significantly, and therefore anyone following after Calvin in Calvinist or what we might call Reformed circles. I know a lot of people within that persuasion prefer to be called Reformed than Calvinist. The reading for the course is 25% of your grade. Plan on reading an average of about 8 hours per week. That's a lot of reading. If you read slow, you're going to want to increase that time. So if you plan for that, then you should be okay. Okay. I'm just going to allow you to tell me whether or not you did the reading. I'm going to assume that you're not willing to sacrifice your integrity for the sake of a grade. Your forum posts. Forum posts are 30% of your grade. What that means is I'm going to give you a question or maybe a couple of questions, and I'm going to want to see a post from you that thoughtfully engages with that question with the content of this course. Or other courses you're taking right now, that's perfectly fine. I'm happy to allow you to bring in interdisciplinary information, but the core of your answer, the core of your engagement needs to really be within the content of this class. The schedule for our interactions, I'll post the question on Sunday. I'd recommend you respond to the question as soon as you can, but you have to respond by Wednesday with your initial post. by Friday, you need to respond to somebody else. And by Saturday, you need to respond to everyone who has responded to you. Now, that doesn't mean that, like, if you get 6 people responding to your post, I'm not gonna hold you to that. Okay, I just need to see that, like, you're acknowledging other people engaging with what you've said, and you're engaging with them. If they ask you a question, you answer it. That sort of thing. Okay, so that's how the forum posts are going to work. The next point is videos. View and listen to each lecture in order to provide a conceptual framework for the readings. Each week, you will indicate the percentage of the lectures completed. This is going to be the same with the reading. So if you say that you've watched the videos, then I'm going to trust you and you're going to get credit for it. So that means that 40% of your grade, the readings and the videos, are just you saying that you've watched or read. Okay, so that's almost half your grade, and that's just you just doing the work. There's no assessment there; it's just you doing the work. Okay, research paper is just huge, and it's a lot of work. So you need to start on it as soon as possible. It's 30% of your grade. Of that 30%, 5 of those percentage points are allotted for turning in your outline and topic on time. Your outline and your topic could be just rubbish, and you still are going to get those 5 points, because I just want to see that you're working on it ahead of time, that you're on top of things, and you're not falling behind. Okay. So let's talk about the reading. The reading is absolutely vital to your success in this course. If you don't do the reading, you're not going to do well in the course. I can promise you that. Okay. And I know that some of you right now are probably hearing me say that and thinking, challenge accepted. I get that. Okay. But don't be Barney Stinson. Okay. Just let's not do that. Okay. The reading is absolutely vital for your success in this course, and I want you to do well in the course. Okay. When you do the reading, I'm really concerned mostly with you getting the big picture. I'm not concerned with you getting every single detail that exists. I'm not interested in you memorizing every single date. I'm not interested in you memorizing every single person. I'm interested in you getting the overall flow of the narrative, what's going on in history, how it's developing from person to person, from century to century. That's the main concern here. Now, that doesn't mean that I want you to skim everything. What that means is I am less interested in you knowing that Adolf von Harnack wrote History of Dogma, which is 7 volumes in the English translation. I'm more interested in you understanding how he and others like him contributed to the rise of historical theology as a discipline. So I don't want you to get lost in the minutiae. I just want you to, if you see his name in writing again, that you would think, oh, he's an important person in the rise of historical theology. It's probably about what you need to know, at least at this stage. Okay, that's what I'm shooting for. Okay, the main thing that I want you to really focus on digesting is Life in the Trinity. That's one of your textbooks. Jonathan Hill's Christian Thought and Alistair McGrath's Historical Theology are both fantastic. But I think Life in the Trinity is going to have the most impact on you, both theologically and devotionally. And so if you're going to pick a book to spend your time on, I would like you to spend your time on it. The other 2 books, I'm not saying you should skim them, but you don't have to read them as rigorously. You don't have to really sit down and try to digest every single word. Okay, if you're going to do that with one of the books, do it with Life in the Trinity. Okay. Speaking of Alistair McGrath, he has another book called The Christian Theology Reader, and I actually was going to use that for this course, but apparently it's a textbook in another course that you take. So if you have that from that other course, I would recommend you using it. I think it would be a great resource for you in your research paper. It's going to give you really easy access to primary sources, which will be really helpful for you in that research paper. So I would recommend that. Okay, let's take a look at the textbooks in particular. Life in the Trinity by Donald Fairbairn, my advisor. He's just brilliant. You can get some of his videos on YouTube from times that he's lectured, and I got to tell you, he's a genius. And this book, if you really give this book the time, then it will change your life. Okay, it'll change the way that you understand salvation. It will change the way that you understand Christianity. Okay. Jonathan Hill's History of Christian Thought is wonderful in that it gives us biographical sketches of various theologians. Really helps you kind of put a face to the name, so to speak, in that like it helps you understand what kind of person Justin Martyr was before you read anything that he says or read what he believes. That just really, it helps a lot. It helps a lot to kind of get a feel for what kind of person he was. So that's going to be the focus of his work. Alistair McGrath is going to approach it more from the approach of the period itself. So he's going to be looking at various controversies, various theological developments, councils, etc. And he'll give you some biographical information occasionally, but it won't be very extensive. But it does a pretty good job. The downside here, and I'm just going to be honest with you, McGrath does get a lot of stuff wrong, particularly in the patristic period. And, you know, it just can't be helped. You know, nobody's perfect. Alistair McGrath has 2 PhDs and has written, I don't even know how many books. I mean, he's not perfect. You know, he's a brilliant guy, but he's not perfect. So when those things come to light, I'll be sure to mention them in our videos so that you're aware of places that he's maybe a little mistaken. And I'll try to give you some supplementary information to help kind of shore that up. Okay. Grading for the videos is going to be very similar to grading for the reading. If you've watched them, then you get credit. Okay. We're also going to be doing synchronous video meetings, which is basically like a group Skype. We're going to do one probably the second week of class, and then we're going to probably do another one a little bit after halfway. You know, but I'm open to suggestions if you guys want to do more or less or whatever. Additionally, if you want me to Skype you or talk on the phone or anything like that, I'm happy to do that. You know, whether it's individually or a group, I'm happy to do that throughout the semester. The videos for the course are available online. They're also available through my YouTube channel. You can just use this link here, and you can subscribe to my YouTube channel if you'd like. Back to the research paper. This is the most important thing in the course. So research paper, the instructor will provide suggested topics throughout the course, but you're allowed to come up with your own topic, but your topic needs to be approved by the instructor. You need to be aware that a good topic is the bedrock of a good paper. Therefore, if you select a poor topic, the resulting paper will not earn a satisfactory grade. This just can't be overstated. A good topic is the only way that you're going to have a good paper. A bad topic will basically guarantee that your paper is bad. In your initial forum post, the questions are going to be primarily, you know, tell me who you are and what you like and what you want out of the class and stuff like that. I'll try to pick up on your interests and suggest some research topics that might line up with them. So if you think artwork is just the coolest thing in the world, then maybe you want to research the iconoclastic controversy in the patristic era, which centered around the use of artwork in worship. That might be interesting to you. Okay. Your bibliography should demonstrate appropriately broad research, not relying exclusively on one author, publisher, or perspective or type of source. It should include at least 6 sources. It should not be a problem, and there should be several more in a solid paper, but points will be deducted if there's less than 6 sources there. If you want to get an A on the paper, here are my suggestions. Okay. Research your interests. If it bores you, it will bore me, and it will likely be a bad paper. Okay. So find things that you're passionate about, find things that you're interested in, and figure out a way to write a paper about it. Make sure it's relevant to the course, though. For instance, a paper on marriage equality is probably not going to get an A. Okay? It just isn't relevant to the course. So here's what you need to do to pick the topic. Pick a period: apostolic, patristic, medieval, Reformation, modern, or postmodern. Okay? Those are the periods that we're covering in this course. Then pick a doctrine: Christology, pneumatology, biblical interpretation, ecclesiology, soteriology, whatever it is, right? Spiritual formation, any of that stuff, okay? Then pick an author in that period that deals with that doctrine, and then use one of that author's works. So you could do, for instance, Christology in the patristic period as seen in Athanasius's On the Incarnation. That would be a fantastic paper. Now, look, if that isn't interesting to you, if that bores you, don't do it. Okay. Grading rubric for your paper. Since the paper is 25% of your grade, it will be graded out of 25 points. That means that each of these sections represents actual percentage points of your final grade. The first 5 points are for the appropriateness of your topic. Here are some of the papers that have done well in this course: Christology of the patristic era through the art the Christ Pantocrator at Sinai. This is a specific piece of artwork at a specific monastery. I actually have a smaller copy of the Christ Pantocrator, and this is what that icon looks like, and it's one of my favorite icons, and so I was really excited to see a student approach that icon for his research paper, and it was a great paper. Another paper topic: spiritual disciplines and spiritual formation in the writings of Dallas Willard. Dallas Willard is an author who only recently passed away. Very influential author on spiritual formation. If you're interested in that and you've not heard of him, then you should pick up The Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard. It's a classic, and yeah, I'd wait till after this class because you have a lot of reading to do. so just put that on your Amazon wish list. Okay. Another topic was Thomas Burton on spiritual direction and meditation. I mean, these are historical characters who have written significant works on a specific topic that works for me. Okay. Conversely, here are a few that did not do well, usually because they were either too broad or not related to the course. The sacred union of marriage, the need to return to God's original design. Look, marriage equality is an important topic for a lot of people on both sides of the debate. Okay, I get that. This is not a historical theology paper. If you wanted to do a historical theology paper on marriage, you could do the theology of marriage as we see it in the Reformation in something that Martin Luther wrote. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that would have directly pertained to marriage, but they had to rethink what their theology of marriage was because most of the reformers were monks and they weren't married, and so then they stopped being monks and thought, hey, I can get married. So that was a big deal for them, right? Is Rob Bell a heretic? This is not a historical theology paper. Now, if you wanted to compare the theology of Rob Bell with a historical character, this could have been a fantastic paper. There's a church father named Origen, and Origen espoused some things about universal salvation. It's referred to as apokatastasis, and Origen's apokatastasis is very similar to Rob Bell's universalism in Love Wins. There are a lot of similarities there. Now, I'm not saying they're identical. I'm not saying that Rob Bell's a genius or even that he's on the same level as Origen. He's absolutely not. Origen was incredibly brilliant, and I mean, Rob Bell's a sharp guy, I guess, but they're not punching the same way. Okay, but there are enough similarities there that you could do a good paper discussing whether or not Rob Bell is a heretic in light of what Origen wrote. And so that could have been a good paper, but that's not what this was. Okay, Proving God Exists in a New Atheism Influential World. Note the typo in the title. If you have a typo in a title, you're not getting an A. That's just not going to happen, because that's indicative of a lack of proofreading that's going to come out throughout the paper, and that's just going to be a bad thing. Okay. Additionally, this paper was entirely focused on apologetics, which is fine, but if you want to do a historical theology paper that is focused on apologetics, then you're going to need to find a way to tie your topic into a historical person, right? So you're going to want to, how would Justin Martyr, who's largely considered the first apologist in the church, how would Justin Martyr respond to new atheism? Right, that would be a fantastic historical theology paper. If you're interested in apologetics, check that out. That would be fantastic. Okay, but that's not what was done here. And this last option, this one made me laugh when I first read it, and a comprehensive history of the doctrine of the Trinity. There's no way in 10 pages you're going to do comprehensive anything. So you just need to strike comprehensive from your vocabulary when you're writing your paper, because it's not going to happen. Okay. You can't do a comprehensive history of Augustine's approach to the Trinity in 10 pages, let alone everyone's approach to the Trinity. That isn't going to happen. Okay. Back to the grading rubric. Your depth of research is going to be 5 points. So here's how I want you to approach the research. Okay. Satisfactory paper will demonstrate legitimate research in the form of cited monographs, books, journal articles, and even websites. Internet sources may be used, but you should exercise discretion. So, for instance, Wikipedia and WebMD are not acceptable. I have no idea how someone would use WebMD in a historical theology research paper, but I'm sure eventually someone will. So, again, don't be Barney Stinson. As soon as you heard me say that and you thought challenge accepted, I'm going to use WebMD. Please don't do that. Okay. I've taught for long enough to know that when I say things like that, someone is like, I'm going to do that. Okay. Don't be that person. Okay. Books are not guaranteed legitimacy either. With ready availability of self-publishing, not all printed material is worth reading or citing. Basically, anybody can publish anything at this point. So you're going to want to look for good publishers. You're going to want to look for IVP, Zondervan, Fortress Press, Erdman's. I'm just looking around my office to the books that I have here. Let's see, HarperCollins, Baker, Oxford University Press. Basically, any university press is probably going to be good. Yeah. So if you find, books in those publishers, you're probably going to be good. If you find books outside of that, it may not be. Okay. So just be mindful of the publisher. Also be mindful of who the author is. If it's a blog, an article, or a book, if the person has a PhD and they're a professor at Oxford, then I'll take their blog as a credible source, okay? Larry Hurtado is a world-renowned expert on New Testament and early Christian origins, and he has a fantastic blog that you can follow and get email updates on regularly. If you wanted to cite Larry Hurtado's blog, I would take it, okay? But, Billy Bob's Bible blog, who has a bachelor's in biblical studies from Possum Hollow Bible College, that isn't going to fly, right? I mean, I run a blog. I don't know that I would take my blog as a source, it's just not, it's not worth it, okay? So just pay attention to who the person is. Look at what they do for a living. Look at what their education was. Look at what kind of endorsements they have. If you go to a book and it's endorsed by a New Testament professor at Notre Dame, then yeah, that's probably going to be a good book. But if you go to a book and it's endorsed by Bono, it may not be the best theological book in the world. Now, look, I love U2. I've seen them live. They're fantastic. But I'm not looking to Bono for my theology, right? And it's just not, and somewhere my wife just got really angry because they're her favorite band. So I'm going to have to apologize later. Finally, use the course bibliography. I've put a lot of work into that course bibliography. So whatever your research paper is, there should be at least one or two sources there for you. So if you're looking for sources, start there, right? Okay. Then the next points for the research paper, quality analysis is 10 points. Basically what that means is I want to see an informed opinion that's drawn from good sources, not a previously existing opinion that has been proof texted from sources. Assume your exegesis classes teach you how to draw the author's meaning out of a text. Do that with your research. Do not proof text. That's what people do with the Bible all of the time, and that's what people do with research papers all the time. You have an idea, and then you just quote mine. You just look for quotes that support your idea, and then you write a paper around it. That's not what I'm looking for, okay? I'm looking for an informed opinion drawn on good sources, okay? That's what we're shooting for. That's what quality of analysis has to do with, okay? Organization and clarity is 2.5 points. Your essay should be clearly organized. You need to outline it before you write it, and that outline is due before the paper is due. Outline carefully and write carefully. That allows your reader, which is me in this case, to follow your argument and be persuaded by your evidence. Evidence is incredibly important, but it's easily missed when not presented in a clear manner. If you have an argument that's impossible to follow, then I'm not going to be persuaded by it, not because I'm stubborn, but because I'm not going to be able to understand what you're trying to convince me of. Okay, so you need to organize. This is why the outline is so crucial. Okay, then finally, 2.5 points for mechanics and elegance. Here's what this means: proofread. Proofread your paper. Okay, proofread it. Have someone else proofread it. Let it sit for a day or two, and then read it again. I know that a lot of you are going to want to wait until the last day to write your paper. Do not wait till the last day. Set your personal due date a few days ahead of the actual due date. So that way you have it done early. You can let it sit for a day or two, and then you can read it again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to read it after not reading it or writing it for a couple of days. When you pick it up fresh, you're going to get ideas on how to improve your argument, and you'll stand a better chance of noticing your errors in grammar, syntax, and spelling. Okay? So that's just incredibly important. All right? That takes care of the intro to the course. If you have any questions, email me, call me. You find me on Facebook if you want. If you guys want to friend me on Facebook, you're welcome to do so. So I'd like to go ahead and move forward to our next lecture, which covers what is historical theology. And so we're just going to cover that question really quick, and then we'll be done for this video. Okay. So what are we studying in this class? What is historical theology? What does that even mean? Okay. Well, first we should probably say a word about what we mean by theology. What does theology even mean? Okay. Have you ever heard somebody say, "I don't like theology, I just want to love Jesus"? This is a common and unfortunate approach to the discipline of theology. Theology occurs whenever one thinks of God, up to and including thoughts about his non-existence, if you happen to be an atheist. Everyone does theology. Even the statement in question, "I don't like theology, I just want to love Jesus," is a theological statement, right? Because you're making a statement about God. Okay, that's essentially what we mean by theology. Theology is from the two Greek words, theos and logos. Theos is the Greek word for God, whether capital G or little g, and logos is the Greek word for word. And so basically it just comes down to like discourse about God, speech about God. That's what that comes down to, right? I know there's, problems with defining something based on its etymology because, a butterfly is not a fly made of butter, but it works here, okay? So that's what theology is. But there's a distinction here that we need to make. Originally, theology was just speech about God, right? It was logos about theos, right? That's what it was. It's just speech about God. And that's even, prior to Christian usage of the term. It gets used that way in Greco-Roman philosophers who have some sort of a concept of a supreme deity. And so theology to them is just, what does that supreme being look like? Over time, by around the 12th and 13th centuries, we start to get a lot more very creative theological speculation. We'll talk about that more later. But part of that is they start asking questions about, what's the nature of the church? And so they call that ecclesiology, coming from ecclesia, the Greek word for assembly or church. So ecclesiology is the study of the church. Hamartia is the word for sin in Greek. So hamartiology becomes what is the nature of sin. Christology is what is the nature of Christ. Pneumatology is what's the nature of the Holy Spirit. So they start getting all of these categories, all these systematic categories. This is, systematic theology really starts to blossom during this time. And so they start calling all of these categories collectively theology. Well, hamartiology, the study of sin, doesn't have anything to do with the being of God, right? You're not really talking about God when you're talking about hamartiology. And so we have to distinguish between theology proper, which means discussion about God himself, discussion about the nature of who God is, and general theology, which is kind of my own term. Theology proper is acknowledged. General theology, I don't know another way to put this, other than just calling it theology, is this sort of umbrella that encompasses all of these various disciplines that start to really be developed in the Middle Ages when systematic theology really just takes off. And so we have, theology proper, who is God, what is God like, and then general theology, which is ecclesiology, hamartiology, soteriology, doctrine of salvation, eschatology, study of last things, all of these different things. And then also along with them is theology proper, right? Theology proper would then be a subset of general theology, okay? So that distinction is worth making, because when we talk about historical theology, we're using general theology. That's what we mean. We're talking about theology in general. We're not talking about God himself. We're talking about all of these different categories that come around in the Middle Ages. Okay. Another distinction that's worth making is church history. when we talk about historical theology, we're not talking about church history. These are not the same thing. McGrath makes this distinction in his book as well. Church history wants to know how the church has developed. Historical theology wants to know how theology has developed. So let's take something like the Reformation, right? The Reformation is an incredibly important event. Whether you're a Protestant or not, it's incredibly important, okay? The Reformation is important to a church historian because it changed the face of Christianity. It changed what it meant to be in the church, at least from a Protestant perspective. A historical theologian is interested in the Reformation because it changed the nature of soteriology, the doctrine of salvation. It changed how we understand justification. So this notion of justification by faith really starts in the Reformation, or at least, technically, I guess the Reformers would say they rediscovered justification by faith. But, for the sake of this conversation, we don't have to get into all the specifics of it right now. Right? So a historical theologian is interested in the Reformation for a different reason than a church historian is. Church historian is interested in when did it happen, why did it happen, right? Historical theologian is really more interested in, how has this changed the way that theology is done, right? It's that sort of stuff. Why do we believe in the Trinity? How do we properly articulate the Trinity? These are answers that are provided for us through historical theology. I mean, that's the purpose of historical theology. And we ignore it to our peril because, it's one thing to say, God is three and God is one. Well, unless you articulate that God is one essence and three persons, then God is three and God is one could be logically contradictory. But if God is three persons and one essence, it's not logically contradictory, right? So we really have to be careful how we parse those things out. We'll talk about the doctrine of Trinity in more detail later on, okay? But this ignorance of church history, and I don't mean ignorance there as a pejorative. I just mean, the lack of knowledge, right? This lack of knowledge of church history really is to our detriment. This is what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery, okay? And here's what Lewis said about chronological snobbery. And pardon me, it's a direct quote. He does have some profanity there right at the beginning, but, I apologize, okay? Why, damn it, it's medieval, I exclaimed. For I still had all the chronological snobbery of my period and used the names of earlier periods as terms of abuse. See, what he's saying here is that he could just say it's medieval, and with saying that, could just dismiss it as though it didn't matter, right? Barfield, who's someone that Lewis read, Barfield made short work of what I have called my chronological snobbery, the uncritical acceptance of the intellectual climate common to our own age, and the assumption that whatever has gone out of date is on that account discredited. So he's saying that chronological snobbery is saying that if it's gone out of fashion, if it's old, then we don't need it. It's unnecessary, it's not useful, right? This is a common view today. You must find how it went out of date, though, Lewis says. Was it ever refuted? And if so, by whom, where, and how conclusively? Or did it merely die away as fashions do? If the latter, this tells us nothing about its truth or its falsehood. Okay? If it just went out of fashion, that doesn't tell us whether or not it's true. That just tells us that it wasn't popular anymore. There's a lot of things that are true that are unpopular, right? So just because it's unpopular doesn't mean that it's not true, right? From seeing this, one passes to the realization that our own age is a period and certainly has, like all periods, its own characteristic illusions. They are the likeliest to lurk in those widespread assumptions which are so ingrained in the age that no one dares to attack or feels it necessary to defend them. Basically, our approach to history is church history goes from the death of the last apostle in probably 100 AD, 110 AD, to 1517 when the Reformation happened, and then skips from Luther's time to, probably the 1950s or 1960s or maybe even later, right? And all these other things in between, we just don't need to bother with those things, right? See, you don't know why you believe things unless you look at the historical development of those things, right? Here's another quote that's worth looking at, okay? Tradition is the living faith of the dead. Traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And I suppose I should add, it is traditionalism that gives tradition such a bad name. The reformers of every age, whether political or religious or literary, have protested against the tyranny of the dead, and in doing so have called for innovation and insight in the place of tradition. See, Protestants are normally allergic to tradition. They abhor it, right? I don't want tradition. Yeah, but Pelikan here, Yaroslav Pelikan is just a genius, or rather was a genius. He passed away recently. He's a professor at Yale, and his 6-volume church history is just a magnum opus. If you're really interested in a solid approach to church history, Yaroslav Pelikan's 6-volume is fantastic. What he's saying here is tradition's not a bad thing. Traditionalism is a bad thing, right? And we react against this as Protestants because I don't want tradition, right? That's a Catholic thing, right? Well, never mind the fact that, not everything that's Catholic is evil, right? Think for a moment. If you're a Protestant, you probably hate tradition, but your church services probably start at the same time every week. You probably sing the same number of songs, usually in the same basic order and progression. Probably start with some fast songs and progressively work your way towards slower, more somber, contemplative songs every single week, probably. Your message is probably delivered by the same person most weeks, and it's usually the same length and the same style every week. You probably do communion in a regular interval, whatever that interval might be, whether it's, the third Sunday of every month, like a lot of places, or every 2 weeks, or, first Sunday of every month, something like that. You do all of these things every single week, but tradition's evil, right? Think about this. You worship on Sunday every week. We all do. We all worship on Sunday every week. But let's go back to the first century. When did they worship? If the first Christians were Jews, unilaterally, their original worship service was Saturday. So why do we worship on Sunday? This change happened really early on, and you probably can't explain it. Here's why this happened. Saturday worship was intended to celebrate God's creation and mimic his rest. So, for all of this time, Judaism worshiped on Saturday because on the seventh day he rested. God sanctified the Sabbath and made it holy, right? But then these first Christians said, but that's not the most important thing in history. The most important thing in history isn't that God created and then rested. The most important thing in history is Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the graves bestowing life. That's an English translation of some early church liturgy. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. When did Christ rise? On Sunday. So the early Christians said, we're not going to celebrate creation every week. We're going to celebrate the new creation every week. We're not going to celebrate God's rest from creation. We're going to celebrate Christ's rest from his finished work in his earthly ministry. So every week we're going to be reminded that Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. I hope this has given you an idea of what we're going to be doing this semester. I hope it's provoked in you some excitement for this semester. I know I'm excited. I love this topic. I hope this little reflection on Sunday worship has encouraged you to appreciate what context can do. Ritual without context is not helpful. But when we add context to ritual, man, that is good. Man, that's good. I'm excited to go to worship on Sunday because every week I have a reminder that Christ is risen from the dead. I hope you enjoy this class. I hope you enjoy our time together. I know I will. I love this. So, Heavenly Father, I thank you for this class. I thank you for the enthusiasm of the students. Thank you for their dedication to their studies and their dedication to you, Lord. That is a gift. That is a gift from you. So I thank you for that gift. I pray that you grow that gift in them. You grow their enthusiasm. You grow their determination. That they would each week, with their reading, with their discussion posts, Lord, even in their conversations with their friends as they're processing, they would just continue to grow in their knowledge of you, in their passion for you, in their love for you, as they return the love back to you in some small portion that you have first given them. Thank you for all these things in Jesus' name.